The senator from Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm honored to follow my colleague from Kansas and engage in this bipartisan colloquy for a measure that truly has bipartisan support. My thanks to Senator Klobuchar for her leadership as well. And I'm going to be followed by Senator Coons, who has dedicated himself to civil rights and liberties around the world. This issue is one that rises above politics. Every so often in this body, we are able to rise above politics. Never often enough for many of us, but here is an opportunity to put down a marker, to make a statement, to show with our votes that a great nation keeps promises. America is the greatest nation in the history of the world. We need to keep our promises. And I know about those promises, not only as a member of the Armed Services Committee who has visited Afghanistan several times, but also as a father. My two sons served during this period of time. My oldest son, Matthew, is an infantry officer in the Marine Corps, Helmand Province. My second son is a Navy SEAL. And let me just put it very bluntly. As a dad, as a public official, as an American citizen, I want Americans who are deployed overseas to be helped by people in the country whom we are fighting to serve. Not only Americans and our self-interest here, but also abroad. When our troops are deployed and put in harm's way, they depend on exactly the kind of Afghan allies whom we promised we would not abandon. And if we want to count on those kinds of allies all around the world, not only in Afghanistan and Iraq and that part of the world, but in Africa, in South America, we need to keep our promises. If we lose that credibility and trust, our troops will be in danger. Our sons and daughters will be at risk when they depend on those interpreters, the guards, the guides, the security aides, all of the kinds of allies that we enlisted, Afghan allies, who put their lives on the line and now have targets on their backs if they were ever to return. Bad enough that many of those allies are still in Afghanistan and at risk of torture and murder. But we need to keep faith with the Afghan refugees who have come to this country. I want to salute the veterans, as did my colleague, Senator Moran. They have been heroes in this fight. Their championing this cause has made a tremendous difference, and I thank them for recognizing there is a moral imperative here. That's the reason that our promise needs to be kept. And I will just close, and there is much more that I could say, but I know colleagues would like to comment as well in the limited time we have, by saying these families, these Afghan refugees are coming to this country and they are flourishing here. They are contributing to their communities. They have jobs that matter. They are learning our language. They are imparting to our people the rich cultural heritage that they bring with them, the tastes and the colors of their country, as well as their incredible history. They are enriching the United States of America. We need to keep them here, and we need to give them the security and sense of permanency that is essential for them to continue to flourish. They can't have jobs, they can't put their children in schools, they can't keep housing if they are in limbo. So as a practical matter, we must move. We should have done it last session. We have the opportunity now. It's an obligation. Let's vote on this amendment to enable our Afghan allies to stay in this country as they deserve and need to do. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President,
Senator from Delaware.
Mr. President, just about 2 years ago, roughly 76,000 Afghans, those who served alongside American forces during 2 decades of conflict, and their families, were evacuated here to the United States on military planes and given 2 years of humanitarian parole. The Biden administration has worked to extend that parole, but we have to ask ourselves, to what end? These are our allies, those who served and fought alongside our troops, those who supported our mission and our engagement in Afghanistan, and who worked in an incredible array of jobs: interpreters, medics, security guards, mechanics, intelligence officers, journalists, bomb technicians, and pilots. And I know that today, one family in Newark, Delaware, is waiting urgently to hear that we have taken up and passed this amendment to the Defense Authorization Act. The head of household served as a bomb technician, as an EOD specialist in the Afghan forces, and I had a chance to have the blessing of meeting the mother of a Delaware soldier whose life he saved. I have heard over and over from our veterans families, from Afghans, from their families, that we have to pass this bill so that they have certainty, so that the strengths and talents that they've brought to our country, they can use to put down roots and to have a foundation on which to build a family in peace in our nation. An interpreter, an Afghan interpreter now living in North Carolina, has said permanent residency is linked to everything. What will happen to my family if our status fails? How will I provide for my family in this new country? Another interpreter living now in Nebraska describes their current situation as being trapped as if in prison. This uncertainty, this lack of clear status, harms the ability of our Afghan partners and friends to advance their careers, to put down roots, to start their new lives here in America with confidence. This uncertainty must end. These are folks who believe in the promise of America and who came here confident we would keep our word. On my phone, I was just looking a moment ago at a family celebration that I joined with Shur and Shakira in Newark, Delaware. I don't want to give more details on them other than to say I remember that they and their children are waiting and watching to see what we will do here in the Senate. I want to thank my colleagues, Senators Klobuchar and Moran and Blumenthal and many others, Senators Graham and Shaheen, Murkowski, Durbin, Wicker, and Tillis, who have been co-sponsors of this bill from the last Congress. It also has support from the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, Blue Star Families, the American Legion, and many other veterans groups. Some of the most prominent leaders in the American military: Mike Mullen, Jim Stavridis, Stan McChrystal, William McRaven, forgive me for skipping their titles and ranks, but some of the most respected leaders in our military have endorsed this legislation. If you're worried, as some of our colleagues have said, that the folks brought here by the American military were not thoroughly vetted, this is the way to address it. It requires in-person interviews, oversight, consultations that will ensure that everyone currently here comes back in for one more in-person interview, vetting, and clearing. It also expands the opportunities for SIV visas for Afghan combatants and helps those still stuck in a hell outside our country that would allow families to be reunited. At the end of the day, I just have to thank 2 people and make one plea. I have to thank the family in Delaware who continues to inspire me and push me to support Senator Klobuchar in her tireless work to get this bill the vote it deserves. I want to thank my colleague, Senator Klobuchar, for hearing the voices of American veterans, for hearing the voices of Afghans now in our country who deserve legal status, and I join her in demanding a vote on this amendment to the Defense Authorization Act. With that, I yield the floor.
Thank you very much to Senator Coons for his strong words, Mr. President. and for focusing on what matters here, which is the people of our own country, the military, and those who support them, who believe that this situation is simply untenable, that these Afghans that stood with us risk at any moment being deported, not right now because of an order that President Biden has in place, but that's not the only problem of that uncertainty. The problem is they can't go on with their lives as has happened with past evacuees. After Cuba, I noted, after Vietnam. They are part of the fabric of life in the United States of America now. So let's hear what some of these security experts have to say. I'm going to read a portion of a letter that a group of them sent to congressional leadership. They said this is my words, this is theirs. The Bipartisan Afghan Adjustment Act honors our nation's commitment to its wartime allies by providing a path to permanent status for Afghan evacuees. It also ensures that these evacuees are properly and scrupulously vetted prior to considering them for such status. The status quo leaves tens of thousands of evacuees in legal limbo while failing to put to rest security concerns raised in the Office of Inspector General report. So we could just pretend that report doesn't exist. We could just do nothing. How can that be the answer? How can the answer be just to put our heads in the sand while they put their lives at risk for us in the sands of Afghanistan? That's why we have to vote on this amendment. They go on to say, the security experts who've worked for a number of Republican and Democratic presidents, no action is not an option. We urge you to pass the Afghan Adjustment Act. I want to repeat that last point. No action is not an option. Here's another letter of support from the former ambassadors to Afghanistan. 8 former United States ambassadors, think about this, they actually served in Afghanistan. And a number of us, probably nearly everyone in this chamber who was around during that time, which is many of us, have visited with these ambassadors during one president or another. These ambassadors served under Presidents George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and Joe Biden. And each have an intimate understanding of the stakes for getting this right. They wrote together, "We are a group of retired ambassadors, all of whom served as chief of mission at the U.S. Embassy in Afghanistan, who have dedicated our professional lives to furthering America's interests in the world. We are writing today because we are convinced that the Afghan Adjustment Act furthers those interests. The need is urgent and the time is short. Without the Afghan Adjustment Act," they write, "the task of American diplomacy will be much more difficult. In the future, our allies will be less likely to support the U.S. missions if they see that our Afghan partners are abandoned. In diplomacy, our words will have lost meaning. We urge you to act to pass the Afghan Adjustment Act without delay." So I have spoken a lot about the Afghan stories today, as have my colleagues, Senator Coons and Senator Blumenthal and Senator Moran, because this is all personal for those of us who meet with our military and hear the stories of those who saved their lives, who put their lives on the line. But this is also about U.S. interests abroad in the bigger story of our national security, about keeping our covenants when we make promises, about expecting other people in other lands in future conflicts to be willing to put themselves and their families at risk to stand with our soldiers. Who's going to want to do that again if they hear that we made promises over decades, and then when those brave people came to our country, we left them in legal limbo? You heard the story of the sad, tragic story out of Virginia a few weeks ago, where someone, an Afghan who had served as an interpreter, who was working 2 jobs in legal limbo, was murdered as a Lyft driver in the middle of the night. Those are the stories. If people see that brinkmanship in Congress outweighs the promises we made overseas, how can we lead? Finally, I want to share some words from a group of more than 36 of our nation's most esteemed military leaders, including General Joseph Dunford of the U.S. Marine Corps, Admiral Mike Mullen of the U.S. Navy, General Richard Myers of the U.S. Air Force, Admiral Jim Stylianides of the U.S. Navy, General Peter Corelli of the U.S. Army, General Stan McChrystal of the U.S. Army, General David McKeeran of the U.S. Army, Admiral William McRaven of the U.S. Navy, General Austin Miller of the U.S. Army, General John Nicholson Jr. of the U.S. Army, General David Rodriguez of the U.S. Army, General Curtis Scaparrotti of the U.S. Army, General Raymond Thomas III of the U.S. Army, General Joseph Votel of the U.S. Army, and General Mark Welsh of the U.S. Air Force. I read the complete list last night, and I will do it again. But that just gives you a sense of the kind of people that I think we should be listening to. Maybe it's worth my colleagues a minute of their time to sit back and look at the people who are supporting this bill, who lead our military or have led our military. They have been resolute in their support for the Afghan Adjustment Act. And the letter they sent to congressional leadership makes that clear. In their words, this is their words, not mine, if Congress fails to enact the Afghan Adjustment Act, the United States will be less secure. Let's read that again. If Congress fails to enact the Afghan Adjustment Act, the United States will be less secure. My colleague, Senator Moran, outlined why. It's about the fact that there's no vetting in place, and this puts the vetting in place. And most importantly, it is about the fact that to keep our nation's leadership and to be true to our covenant, then we have to be true to our word. And then finally, we have the stories of people who, if allowed to flourish in this country, will go on to do great things. So it is on us. This is what else they wrote. Potential allies will remember what happens now with our Afghan allies. If we claim to support the troops and want to enable their success in wartime, we must keep our commitments today. The Afghan Adjustment Act will go a long way. Additionally, without the fixes, this is their words, applied by the Afghan Adjustment Act, our immigration system will be less capable, not more capable, of properly processing and vetting applicants. The enhancements that the Afghan Adjustment Act adds to the security screening process of those who are evacuated are of critical importance to our national security. Mr. President, this is a harrowing warning from our military's top brass. Without the Afghan Adjustment Act, our soldiers will face new obstacles in finding allies on the battlefield. Because in the past, we kept our covenants. We kept them. We kept them no matter if the Congress was Democratic or Republican, or the president was Democrat or Republican. We kept our commitments. All I'm asking is that we have a vote, along with my colleagues on this amendment, and I will repeat, the leading Republicans on Judiciary, Armed Services, and the Veterans Committee. Senator Moran, who is here today, are co-sponsors of this amendment and are asking for a vote. We have Senator Durbin, the lead chair of the Judiciary Committee, asking for a vote. We have dozens and dozens of senators who want to get this done. We need this vote. We have Republicans, Democrats, military and veterans groups, national security leaders, retired U.S. ambassadors to Afghanistan, and flag officers all on the same page. They're not debating the nuances of every little word because that bill has been out there now for 2 years. We have strengthened it vastly in response to our colleagues. We have made changes to it, and it is ready to go. Just like our Afghan allies have been ready to go because they have been here for nearly 2 years waiting for us to keep our covenant. Ones that have taken bullets to the face, ones that have lost legs. They are in our country waiting for us to keep our covenant. Until we get this done, we are essentially asking our allies, those that took shrapnel across the body, those that took bullets to their face, to rebuild their lives on the top of a trapdoor that could fall out from under them any second. Without the Afghan Adjustment Act, all of it, their jobs, their homes, their safety, their families, could disappear. By including this amendment in the NDAA, we can strengthen the national security of our country by making our vetting program more thorough. You heard Senator Moran talk about that. A huge issue of Senator Graham's, and we worked together to use the gold standard, which, as I mentioned, has been supported by leaders under every single one of the last 4 presidents. So let's put aside the politics and the distractions. Let's do what's right for our national security, for our global reputation, and for Afghan allies who shed blood alongside our troops on the battlefield. This defense bill is about what? One and foremost, our nation's security. So ask yourself, those in the gallery who have been listening the past hour, to our colleagues on both sides of the aisle, support this bill. Does this amendment support our national security? Of course it does. The top brass, those that were in charge during Afghanistan, they have told us that it does. 2, this bill that we are voting on this week and all the series of amendments, it should set a moral example for the world. That's what the United States, that's what we have done. Through World War I, through World War II, we set a moral example for the world. That's what this amendment does too. It sets a moral example for the world. And 3, we must show people everywhere that when America makes a promise, when America makes a covenant, it must be kept. The Afghan Adjustment Amendment advances all those objections. I'm asking my colleagues simply for a vote. If they want to vote against it, it's fine. They can vote against the generals and the VFW and the American Legion. They'll have differences. That's fine. But why would we deny those that took bullets for us even the ability to have a vote in what should be and has been called the nation's greatest deliberative body? Let's be as great as we're supposed to be, which means standing by our allies and showing the world that our word, that America's covenant, matters. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor.